So please help me welcome Victor Yocco.
How do I follow that up? Well, first of all, thank you to Eric and Jesse for having us, and thank you for throwing together such a wonderful day. So if we could all give them a hand as well. I know a lot of work into that. A little bit of insight into the group of speakers you have today. We had a speakers dinner last night, and no fewer than 2 of them promised to heckle me while I'm up here. So it's a bit of a rowdy group. I haven't had that happen before. And then my intro. I do expect beard heckling, so that'll be fine. I'm here to talk a little bit about designing for short attention spans today, a little bit about me. Jesse introduced me. I work for, actually the name of the place I work for is now evolved. We were acquired 3 years ago, and they change our name on about a weekly basis. So we are now called EY Design Studio PHL. We're also hiring, so if you're a designer or a front-end developer and possibly interested in working out of Philadelphia, see me after the presentation as well. I am a UX research director. We have a research team, design team, development team, and I do frequently write and speak on the application of psychology to design. That is how long my beard was last week, so I'm doing good on the growth. Actually, it's a few years ago. All right, so when Eric asked me to talk about designing for short attention spans, I wanted to put together something that attempted to also acknowledge the fact that people have short attention spans. And one of the principles that comes out of adult education is really not to go much longer than 20 minutes with lecture before moving into some other type of activity to process knowledge. Now don't get excited, this is all lecture. But at least I thought about the fact that I'm probably not doing it right. What I did try to do was break this up into 3 chunks that will hopefully be a little more manageable and distinct from each other. So we'll see how it goes. Feel free to cheer or boo at the end. Mostly cheer though, but yes, or throughout. So we're gonna talk about what is an attention span. We're gonna talk about my area really around in psychology. One of the things I really enjoy speaking about is heuristics, and we'll talk about what those are and a little bit of the research-backed heuristics that exist. And then I'll get into a little bit of tactical design. Again, I'm not a designer, and there are definitely sessions here where you will learn more about how to design for attention, but I will talk about some of the elements that are considered critical for designing around capturing and maintaining folks' attention. All right, so with that, Burlington, do you think I'm good looking? You don't have to answer out loud, but no, really you do. No, you don't. I wanted to start with that because a principle coming out of psychology, and particularly the elaboration likelihood model, which 2 researchers, one of whose last name I can't pronounce, so I'm not going to try. When it comes to paying attention and assigning people credibility, something that people factor in, at least in the background as they're processing information, is how attractive they think you are. Or you could then extrapolate that to your experience and how attractive they find that experience. So hopefully those of you who do find me somewhat attractive will pay a little more attention and walk away with a little something from today. The rest of you, I don't know. And my last bullet there on why are you so shallow is a joke because it's human nature. It's not a judgmental thing in terms of you're a bad person for assigning more credibility to something you think is attractive. It's kind of, it's in our biology to do that, to pay more attention to something that either pleases your eye or somehow inspires you. So keep that in mind. Your users as well as yourself are the same way when using your product. All right, so let's go into talking about an attention span and what exactly that is. There's at least 2 types of attention spans that are looked at in research and in the literature. So there's your transient attention span, and that's more what captures your attention briefly. It could be also referred to as a distraction, but if you think about it, a distraction is also paying attention because you're paying attention to something. It's just not maybe what's right in front of you, or it takes your attention from one area to another. And that is not necessarily defined in terms of it lasts 1 second or 20 seconds, but it's fair enough to say that what it doesn't do is cause deep processing of information, cause you to learn much or experience something in a deep manner. versus sustained attention, which is where you are either learning or producing something and you're able to go from starting something to accomplishing something. And that also isn't specifically defined, but it's relatively longer period of time, much longer than a transient attention span. So either one of these you can design for, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later, but for initially gaining someone's attention, you might actually focus more on what is it I can do to just do that snap 1 or 2 seconds to get them to pay attention to something. Or if it's just part of an interface and there's something that's really important that you need them to call out, like a new message or an alert, then how are you drawing their attention away from where they're usually placing their sustained attention? I already said that. So I have bad news. Time Magazine said it. Microsoft did a study a few years back that in the write-up, they compared the length of attention they found users were paying to what they had pulled from some other study was the attention span of a goldfish. And that was a good way to get people's attention. I remember it like it was yesterday. But no, I remember seeing a lot of things like, oh my gosh, because of the digital age, humans can no longer pay attention. As a matter of fact, a goldfish can pay better attention than a human. I don't know if that's true, and I don't know if it matters, but what it does speak to is what do we need to do to try to get people's attention? And it looks like there's a fish stuck in my tooth there. I promise you that's not what's happening. I don't know, it's probably beard hair. But the goldfish number itself is questionable because the study that initially was published around the goldfish, I read a follow-up article that said that study isn't being located currently, and I couldn't find it either. So nobody probably knows the exact amount of attention that a goldfish can pay, but I'm just also not convinced it really matters. If you know people have a tendency to not pay close attention to things or for a long period of time, that's the issue that we need to address, and not necessarily a concern that goldfish are going to outperform us on tests or something. So you do need to care about your users' attention. Goldfish, not so much. One reason, and who's familiar with Jacob's law? And this is all right. Okay, so it's a principle of UX, and I believe if you Google it, you'll come up with a website that has a whole bunch of principles where you can download the poster. And so instead of Team Beat posters, I have a whole bunch of UX principles posters in my bedroom. Anybody else? No? So Jacob's law, and this is Jacob from the Nielsen-Norman group, he says users spend most of their time on other sites, and the punchline to that, at least from his point of view, is so make your site function a lot like other sites because people don't want to relearn an experience each time. Now, I agree with that, but I also have a different take when we think about attention span and this. So I completely agree. Users spend most of their time on other sites, on other products, doing other things. And so really it's also, they don't want to spend a lot of extra time on your site. So when you think about the amount of attention that you need from a user, why do you need it, and how much are you expecting them to pay is important questions for you to know, because most of the time people aren't going to, say, their banking site to spend an inordinate amount of time there. They don't want that to be 90% of their browsing behavior. Unless it's an enterprise product or something that someone is using all day long, their goal is usually to either accomplish a task or find information and then go somewhere else. So Jacob's law still applies in that you need to think about all these other platforms and websites that your users are probably going to, and how fast can you get their attention and then let them move on. I had a feeling like, has anybody had that feeling where you're a student and there's a class assignment, and when you come in to do your presentation, the student before you gives the presentation that you just gave? Well, Jesse did that to me today by stealing the punchline from this slide, which is you have, a very short amount of time to grab an initial user's attention. And this is a screenshot of an academic research that was done that showed people that the visual stimulation happens immediately if they're coming to a site, and they make a determination whether or not they think it's good just based on that. Harken back to my attractiveness slide. So we do need to think about that. If this first impression is bad, we're not going to keep their attention and they're going to go somewhere else. They're going to reduce the level of quality they assign to the information you present and possibly use a competitor's product because of that. All right. In my intro, I think Jesse mentioned that I wrote a book. A naively young, lesser bearded me wrote a book. And it's on the application of psychology to design. And I think one of the things that the older, more bearded me knows now that I would have written a little more about is that there is an element of ethics or morals, and I'm not an ethical expert or person, but so when we think about applying psychology or applying tactics to our design that are meant to either have people do things like use our product or engage deeper with our product, I believe we do need to answer the question of why. Why do we deserve that? Why do we deserve somebody paying attention to the point where it could become something that actually consumes their life as far as things like Facebook or other social media outlets? And with that, then, as a researcher, my obligation is to convince you to ask questions and hopefully ask these questions from actual people. And I'll go through some of them, but not necessarily read them all. So really understanding, do you know why you want people to use your product? And how long do you need their attention to do that? And that can help influence the way you lay out your workflows, the way you lay out your information. Why do you want their attention? Is it just to complete a task quickly, or do you want them on there experiencing a deep amount of information and digging deeper so that, if it's an educational website? And then really, why do you deserve their attention? Is this something that people should be spending their time on? And how does the engagement with your product actually make their life better or make the world a better place? And I know that's heavy stuff. They asked me to make everybody feel really heavy in the morning so they could be happier the rest of the day. But there is an obligation, I believe, and my next few slides will talk about that in a little more detail. But then from your users, if you want to actually understand how to design for them, what are they currently doing? If your product is going to be something that meets a brand new need that doesn't exist already as far as being met by other digital products, how are they accomplishing this task in real life, and how can you solve for that? What are your similar products or competitors doing, and why is your product better? And how quickly can you get them through with accomplishing your task, thinking of Jacob's Law, where people probably want to move on and start living the rest of their life. So one reason we need to think about the ethical piece, and this is an old article from '96, but I believe it's one of the front runners as far as publications that started talking about, is there such thing as internet addiction? And I honestly don't care if there's such thing as internet addiction as far as being like, is it literally possible to be addicted to using the internet? Because I think there's arguments for both sides on that, and there's definitely more than one side on that issue. However, the fact is people do use the internet and digital technologies a lot, and there is a huge field of, this article is from '96, and it didn't stop, it started things. There's a ton of literature. People are actively looking at how much internet, or how much time people are spending on the internet, how much time people are spending on their smartphones, and is this detrimental in any way? So I think we have to be aware of that we could potentially, when we're designing to capture folks' attention, be contributing to that type of behavior, or we could also be called out for it. Like Netflix was not too long ago when they tried to introduce gamification of watching children's shows, and the product started, I think it was badges that children would earn by watching a certain amount of shows. And do you want Vanity Fair saying someone finally realized this was a potentially catastrophic idea about your product? Like, let's get kids to watch TV all the time, and they can earn digital badges then. So that, I think, is a darker side to how do we design for attention, which is we can also manipulate people, or we have an issue around children going outside and spending less time in nature. Do we want to be linked to something like that through current media or ending up pulling a feature that you added. I mean, I'm sure Netflix invested a ton of money behind the scenes to develop that product and then ended up just pulling it out. The only daily newspaper I read, Japan's National Daily, that's a joke because I don't. In Japan, this is a really big problem, and again, this is talking about compulsive video game playing, but as a country, Japan, this has become a national conversation that I think everybody from their prime minister down has said needs to be addressed, that there's an active effort to take a look at how we can get people to play less video games, and that it is a mental health problem that they need to address at a national level. If you look at the first line of the article, the World Health Organization is talking about this. So again, really, I want to hit home that designing to keep or to gain people's attention comes with a responsibility. Why do you want that? What are you doing that's contributing to making their lives better if they're going to give you their attention? And then lastly, though, maybe on a more positive note, is with problems come opportunities. So Nintendo has put themselves out, and Apple as well. If you look at your phone, you have the screen time now, and that's supposed to be something that helps you with being at least aware of how much time you're spending on your phone. There's opportunities to design for reducing people's attention on things. So what could you do? Nintendo has come out and said, rather than fighting this as being not an issue, we're going to acknowledge, yes, people are playing too many video games, and we're going to start adding features to our systems and to our games that allow us to hopefully convince people to reduce the amount of time, or at least understand the impact of the amount of time they're playing games. So you could actually have yourself on the positive side of what could potentially be an issue if you account for how people's attention is being spent on your product and do it in a way that's responsible. All right, so now the obligatory research methods slide. How do you go in and thinking to the questions slide, how do you answer these questions? Mina's gonna talk a little bit about research later, unless she's deleted that slide. Okay, she told me she was still maybe polishing up something, so I'm not sure exactly what she's gonna talk about yet. But I'm not going to go over these methods. I think everybody should be fairly familiar at least with what they are, but I encourage you that, I know we were talking over dinner last night, a lot of you might come from smaller shops where there's not necessarily a dedicated research team. I work for a place that for years we had 10% or more of our staff were researchers, and I think that that's fairly abnormal. To have dedicated researchers. So I understand that it can be difficult to go out and collect this kind of information constantly and do something with it, especially if you have to design and do coding and market your product. Totally understand that. But interviews, very basic technique that's very common. Contextual inquiry, some people call it other things. I have a client right now that calls it seat rides, and I think that's a great name. Going out on a seat ride today, which just means sitting in a call center next to somebody. But I call it contextual inquiry in my free time. And then usability testing, definitely something that we should all be engaging in regardless, which is getting our designs at some fidelity, whether it's wireframes or the final design, in front of users to understand how they're going to use it and where are there opportunities to improve it. So those are the types of methods that would help you answer the question of why your clients or why your customers should use your product, how are you creating an experience that's beneficial to them. Those are ways of finding out more information from users. So, some takeaways, and this is just section 1, guys. We got a long slog ahead of us. So we need to capture our users' attention. We need to understand why we want and deserve their attention. There are ethical decisions and issues that we need to navigate when we design for attention, and it's essential to conduct research if you want to be user-focused. And I think that something I try to say as often as possible is one of the articles published by the Nielsen-Norman Group says you can't be user experience without user research, and I think that's true. You can't say you're designing for your users if you haven't talked to them or gotten any kind of feedback. And with that, we have a cut scene here, if it'll work. Oh! That's all I wanted to accomplish today. All right. The point of that is, look, we've landed in heuristics, guys. So what are heuristics? Anybody, just show of hands, is anybody familiar with the term? I know one way the term is used is heuristic evaluation, which is a method, I'm going to cite Nielsen Norman 1,000 times today, I guess, that they put out of just doing like a quick assessment on a site. There's also heuristics that are referred to as mental shortcuts. Look, we landed in much better Graphicsville because my designer and artist friend Brandon Sachs, who's not here today, put these slides together. So we really did land somewhere that's not Kansas. Heuristics are mental shortcuts, and these two guys, Tversky and Kahneman, who Daniel Kahneman has actually written a number of books on psychology. He's still producing material, some of which is like bestseller type stuff, so it's not just really dry. They won a Nobel Prize in economics for their theory in the 70s, which is called prospect theory. And what they found was, at the time, economics, psychology, behavioral psychology really thought people made decisions that were rational, and the term rational meaning you weigh the options and you make a rational, this one will benefit me more than this one, so I'm going with this one. That was the going theory at the time. We all know that's not true. So you think with your emotions, you make decisions that are completely irrational. And so prospect theory started exploring that, and it defines some things. So first of all, people are poor at understanding expected value. When people see the bigger number here, they're likely to say, yes, I would like a chance of a coin flip on winning $1,000 over the guaranteed $501 for sure. But if you actually do the math, there's a 50% chance of winning $1,000 means you're probably going to win $500 after two flips, and 501 is more than that. I could also give a longer presentation on expected value because it's a complex topic, but I tried to break it down. So basically, people are more likely to take the 50% chance in a lot of situations, is what they noted, and that is not the rational choice in that situation. People value practical methods over optional rational methods. Practical meaning practiced in this case. So an example from my life is I believe I take the most inefficient path to work, but it's the one I enjoy driving every day. The most rational one is the one the Uber driver takes me on when I use them, and I'm like, this isn't the way I would ever want to go, but it gets me there quicker. So that's valuing practical over the optimal when I'm doing something that I prefer to do, but it's not leaving me with more time or getting me to work quicker. And then this is called an S-curve, but people are risk averse, and it's a visual display of what the researchers found was, and if you look at the vertical line is supposed to represent gain or loss, and then the horizontal is pain and pleasure. People experience more pain from a loss than they do an equal gain in pleasure. So if you took time, for example, people really hate wasting their time even more than they like gaining the same amount of time. Or money, that's why people start to get into situations when they're gambling and they start betting double or nothing. The pain of losing $5 is much more than the joy of winning $5. So once you get in that loss situation, you start trying to win back your money. But in general, people try to not lose at all. And so that impacts people's behavior. And so based on those three principles out of prospect theory, the researchers identified and studied a number of heuristics or mental shortcuts. And the idea behind heuristics is basically you have thousands of decisions you're making each day. You're not giving your full thought to each decision and making a rational one each time. So what are the shortcuts that people make? What are the shortcuts that people make? Anybody? Yeah. So the first one that I'm going to talk about today is the default effect, and that's the tendency for people to not adjust any of the default settings on things that they get. And I think I'm definitely that person. I would argue that designers and developers are less likely those people. You guys like to tinker with things. Or if you're an audiophile, you want to have your speakers set up perfectly. But for me, I just take Sonos out and I let it do its thing. But if you know what you're designing is likely to be used as is out of the box, that should have a heavy influence on what your default settings are. People aren't going to pay attention to what are in the preferences. A lot of people I work with don't know preferences exist as far as like actually using the menu that says preferences. So what are you going to do if you're not going to get people to pay enough attention to actually customize, and you've put all this effort into customization? You need to understand what are their default settings. And this is a story that comes from the UIE. Are you guys familiar with Jared Spool? I think he's out of Boston. This is a story that has been around forever. I think it's true. But he did a study, I think in the 90s, when electricity was first invented, and what people, for whatever reason, for his study, were sending their their backlog or their file from Microsoft Word to him, and they were looking and noticing that for all these people that were sending in their information, none of them had the setting of autosave on. And what they found was the Microsoft, the developers, just had it default to off. And folks who were using the product either didn't know autosave was a thing or assumed that because it was shipped in with that feature turned off that there was no need to turn it on. It was just the best decision because that's how Microsoft had it. And as you know, if you're somebody who's lost work, that autosave can be really helpful, especially if you use a Windows PC and you get the blue screen of death all the time, right? And this is just a sheeple. Brandon drew a sheeple, and that means you just follow, you just keep your default settings on, and you think Microsoft does what you should do as well. But users do assume you have their best interest in mind, so when you're thinking about it, they don't want to pay attention to what do I need to do, how do I optimize my preferences for this product. I want to know that Microsoft or that AutoTrader or whoever has my best interest in mind and knows who I am, and that I don't have to spend any extra amount of my mental effort on their product. And there has been some research that has shown this is something that manifests in other areas as well. So in Europe, a number of the countries where you get your license, the default for being an organ donor is set to yes, you will be an organ donor. And those countries have statistically higher rates of people opting into their donor programs versus like the US, where it's probably a state by state decision, but I know that most states have opt out. You have to opt in. You have to be asked, do you want to be an organ donor, versus you are an organ donor, do you want to not be one? So when thinking about it like that, it actually, what you set your default to can have some very high impact. And how this goes for designing for the unaware. Again, I told you my friend Brandon put together the art on these slides. He's still bitter. He got engaged a couple years ago. He's still bitter that his aunt sent him a congratulations message. But since they weren't friends on Facebook, he didn't actually get the message because even though they weren't friends, Facebook, at least at the time, was segregating your messages based on ones you got from friends and ones you got from just general people. He never saw that, and this was the message his wife or his aunt saw when she sent the message. He fixed it. So if the default setting would have been, hey, what you just sent might not actually be seen by this person, what can you do to make that happen? He wouldn't feel so bitter at this time. But it's little things like that. So how can you message around somebody's just on Facebook, sending a quick message to somebody? You don't pay extra attention to, did this happen? You want to move on with your life. So a message like that with a quick link out would have potentially helped his situation. So just thinking about things like the context, alerts, communication, notifications. What are you auto-updating so that people don't have to go in and update the product themselves? They're not going to be paying attention to that. And what is the privacy? Because again, that can be an issue with folks around, especially around social media, but people don't tend to adjust their privacy settings, and what are you defaulting to there? Naive diversification. This kind of came up at dinner as well last night. Although no one's heckled me yet, I'm disappointed. The deeper we get into this, you guys got 20 minutes to heckle. Naive diversification is essentially that when people have more choices, they make worse decisions. They don't optimize. So when you see a dinner menu and there's 73 things on it that you want to eat, you try to either order all 73, but like if you know, like I'm a big hamburger fan, I'm not, that was a bad example, but this person I'm talking about is a big hamburger fan, but they see tacos and fries and they start ordering everything. What they really should have done was go all in with the hamburger. And the way this manifested itself in economics is around people trying to buy and diversify, but not understanding the logic behind it, and so not making good decisions. So the example we can walk through here is if you are a big taco eater, but you go to a buffet bar, you're best, from an economic perspective, eating all tacos would optimize your behavior. But you naively diversify, and so you get the rest of the stuff. You're much less happier. That S curve, your happiness level isn't going to be as high. So where does that come out in play in design, though, is really you can make things a lot easier for your users by either making decisions for them or packaging decisions. So for example, and this is SurveyMonkey, but it could be anything. They've created packages. Why? Because they have 1,000 different features, but you shouldn't have to go in and choose each one and build your own package unless you really, really want to. So look, here's 3 different types of packages, and we will highlight what it is that each one will allow you to do. Thinking about it from a content presentation, I know we're going to have a speaker today on, I believe, content strategy is, are you presenting information broken into ways that people think is logical? Are people having to hunt and find information all over your site or use your experience in a way that doesn't make sense to them? That's causing them to have to diversify in a way that is overtaxing to people's mental capabilities. And so when you can create categories that make sense, you're reducing the mental load on your users. And I think that when you see people using a site for too long, it's often because the content is not placed in a way that's very logical, and they're having to guess at what goes where. And the way you can do this with your design is offering things that people have already done, allowing them to do it again quickly, showing what they've done before so that they can navigate right back to those areas. Smart search, where you start filling in based on what other people have done. You don't have to reinvent the wheel for each user. You can really let them, based on their past behavior and the behaviors of other users, see what are the most frequent things, how are things tied together on my experience, and how can we get people there. All right, last heuristic, and then we'll try to have another cutscene. This next one's even better, so I'm excited. I'm excited now, so I'm telling you now it's going to happen. The scarcity effect is definitely one we're all familiar with, and this really tries to take advantage of people not paying close attention to things. When something has a limited availability or exclusivity, it makes people want it more. And I know it doesn't apply to us because we are not shallow like that. But outside of this room, when things are limited in availability, people really want to get their hands on it. And so there's ways of taking advantage of that. But you know, this is why things have value in some ways, which is if there's a scarce amount of something, like a precious resource, the price goes up. But then people who can access that go out and get it, and that drives the demand in a certain direction. Making people aware of scarcity is a design element. You can do that in a lot of different ways. I think Brandon just wanted to draw Flappy Bird, so he did this, but who here remembers Flappy Bird? R.I.P. All right, so this game went nuts, and I think it was actually something where people were spending too much time on it, and it got pulled, and then phones that had the game still on it were being sold on eBay. Apparently, there were also like bots driving up the price, but the scarcity, the perceived scarcity of this game was causing phones to be sold for a crazy amount of money. How that translates into actual design, though, is really a way of motivating people. So one thing that I saw is, do I have it on here? Let's see. Yeah, UX Burlington, they use the scarcity effect. So sure, it's all innocent fun and games, but you get on their website. I don't know if I want to buy a ticket today. Oh no. We've got 15 days and 15 hours. And then what do? While I'm watching it? Seconds are ticking, man. I better make a decision now. No, now. Yeah, it's not a video, but if it was, you would see, and I'm sure each one of those seconds, somebody's jumping on there buying a ticket. That's right. So, good job. Good job, because it's not a bad thing, but it is a way of inspiring somebody. I mean, it's been done since the beginning of time, probably, but definitely since the beginning of digital time. I can remember having my heart throat buying like concert ticket, heart in my throat, not my heart throat, but buying concert tickets one of the first times online, and I think it was Ticketmaster, and they had this like 12-minute countdown. I'm like, my dial-up is not gonna do anything in 12 minutes. This is not gonna happen, I'm sorry. I'm just gonna go to the store and buy it through the service desk, because you could do that then too. But yeah, so finish this purchase. You have X amount of time. There's whatever, Amazon has a deal of the day that lasts 24 hours. And the nice thing about Amazon is that it actually is a deal of the day in that it changes every day. I get emails nonstop from major box stores that tell me about a 24-hour sale or a limited time only sale, but I get that same email like 4 times a day, every day. That can't be. You can't have a one-day only sale for every day. So that's a way of still using the scarcity heuristic, but it's actually not super honest. And then this is another example. This is, I don't know, it's probably really called Groogle or something, but Groogle is paying this much money for you to work from home, and look, there's only 46 slots open. Or you even see these on TV, which is like the next 10 callers will get, well, no matter when you call, you're one of the next 10 callers. So that's kind of negative take on how a design would be, which is don't have people signing up to work from home like that. But opportunities to use the scarcity effect would include quantity, amount of time, limited, and then pre-release or access to certain content. So video game makers do this a lot. If you know a certain game is going to be released in 6 months, put your money down now, and we will give you a code that when the game comes out, you'll get like an extra character or an extra field or something, depending on the type of game. Like, you will have access to something because you've acted now, and so you have something that other people don't have. All right, so users can't pay close attention to each decision they make. We know that. Heuristics are mental shortcuts for making decisions, and I only covered 3. There are 30 of them. I wrote about some in my book, and I'm not here to sell my book. Like, they bought some copies, I appreciate that. But there's also, I wrote an article for Smashing Magazine that has a number of heuristics covered. They are fun. I think they're fun because they're interesting in how can you go about using them in a way that reduces the mental effort of your users and increase adoption of your product. I will be super disappointed if this next video doesn't work. And if it does work, can I say this? If they won't give it to you, I will give you a copy of my book via the mail, because I don't have any, for the first person who yells out who or what this is on the video. Oh, please play.
It's a black screen.
Yes! Oh, no, the name's there. But do you guys know Gritty? Do you guys know Gritty? This is a Philly special. Oh, okay. This I brought to you straight from Philly. Yeah. That's all we got, guys. We didn't make the playoffs, so. Yeah. All right. Now you know we're heading into the home stretch. Gritty's taking us there. All right. So again, I am not a designer, but I work with them and I love them, and I believe that I can offer some value. So I will give you some tips, and I will also tell you that I think that there's a lot more coming for the rest of the day. And some of these, actually all of these, are fairly obvious, and so I think that that's something as a researcher and as a person that when I go somewhere and people are looking for insights, that there are some profound things, but most of what we do and most of how we should do it is very straightforward and logical. So for example, if you want someone's attention, don't put a bunch of crap on the screen. That Google work from home ad was distracting and horrid, and I'm sure it was probably meant to be so that people didn't actually pay attention to the information. But if you want somebody to look at and understand what they should be doing when they get to your site or when they're using your product, don't have a bunch of extra stuff on there. I know your marketing department will disagree. But here's an example from something that is called Data Robot. That's the most inaccessible thing in the world in my mind, because it's a statistical package that runs models, and that is just not what I do. But what can I do? Well, I can at least get my data into Data Robot, because it's very clear how I can do that. I can either drag something in immediately or use something from those sources that it lists there. So good job on being clear about what I should do immediately in Data Robot. Oop. Removing distractions. The internet is one big distraction. This is the New York Times. This is an article. I'm not a paying member, so I don't know if it would look different, but I want you to bask in the fact that fully a third of the screen is the actual article I was reading. There's 2 advertisements at the top, the words that I was reading, and then 1 at the bottom. That is really distracting, and what's even worse is on a mobile device and having pop-ups going over what you're reading. This, on the Good Man Project page, this is interesting to me because they run this video on top of what you're reading. Super annoying, but they also present you with an opportunity to get rid of it. Like, hey, become a paid subscriber. So in some ways, as somebody who refuses to be a paid subscriber, I find that super distracting and annoying, but it's like, hey, do you want to pay to get rid of the distraction? Click right here. So maybe that's an effective way of motivating people, but I had to watch a Subaru Legacy drive across my words before I could finish reading the article. I didn't read the other one, and my kids keep sending me the link. I'm like, I'm not going to do that. Why do you keep doing that, guys? It's not going to happen. Animation. Oh, is this going to work? Yeah. All right. So my 17th Nielsen Norman Group reference, and I really didn't plan it that way. It just happened. Is they've got an article that they published on some principles of using motion in your design or animation. What I'm doing here is try to show you bad use. Why are there floating windmills on Victor's slide? I don't even know, guys. I just looked for something that was a really distracting GIF. Or is it a GIF? So what is the goal of your animation? How frequently will it occur? So are you animating every single thing that people do? That's probably not a good thing. But do they draw people's attention? So let's say these windmills were indicative of the windmills are needing repair. That might be a good thing to have. And how does it cause folks' attention to shift or not? And whether they come across this animation over and over again. And does it draw together the relationship between UI elements? And again, I think that I'm pretty sure there is some animation being discussed later on today, or motion being discussed. So that will be a much better presentation than the one slide here that I have as far as digging deeper into the topic. Progress indicators are a good thing for keeping folks' attention because it lets them know, hey, at least you're accomplishing something. Yeah. A watch when Victor's speaking, super helpful. Like, oh, he's got till 10. So the progress indicator for loading something, I think, has become kind of ubiquitous to have something that indicates to people, hey, the content that I am waiting on is on its way. Or then just, a progress indicator through a workflow or task that tells people there is an end and here's where you are. This is slide 73 of 78. But no more videos, guys. All right, give users something to do. And this is a boring slide, but it did cause me to go back to, does anybody remember section 1 of this talk? I do. But going back to the whole ethical decision, I think the things on here are kind of what leads people to being more addicted to doing. If you think about why people are on their phone and what they're doing, they're scrolling, swiping, and tapping. Swipe right. But they're accomplishing something with those. So there's validation or feedback, and if you wanted to get really like brain psychology on it, there's a hit of dopamine that happens when somebody gets validation by doing something like swiping right and finding out that this amazing girl has also swiped right on you and your phone buzzes. That leads to increasing that behavior because the dopamine is something that your brain and your body responds to. So I'm not suggesting that you try to create addictive experiences, but I am saying we know from human behavior that these types of things, if somebody's tapping because they're just angry because your thing won't load, that's not helpful. But if they're tapping and each time they tap, a bird explodes an egg and that's fun to them, then you're actually gonna sustain their attention for longer. So accomplishing something and not just having it be for the sake of doing it. All right, there it is. So Bumble, and this example is from Facebook. What is nice about Facebook on the mobile experience, at least in this example, is you're leaving a review for some place, which I think that most people are unlikely to leave reviews. That's just the truth. But the easier you can make it, so here they don't have to type in anything, they can just tap a couple of things and leave the review. If they want to type that the latte was incredible, they can, but the review would still get left with just tapping on the items there. And Bumble, Tinder, examples of dating apps where people are just scrolling or swiping and making connections. So my point with this slide would be, if you want some inspiration, you don't have to go too far. There's applications that are free that we all know working in design. There's patterns that are effective that exist out there. And now my shout out to the people who didn't heckle me today. We have a whole bunch of great topics coming up. We've got some words on accessibility and designing around addressing that and developing for that, I think, as well. Performance optimization, UX research, if Mina decided that's still happening back there. Visual cues, motion, and context. And then I believe we're closing it out with some conversational UX. So I will be in some of the sessions as well. You can feel free to heckle me one-on-one. No beard heckling or anything. This is it. So, all right, guys, I'm gonna leave it here. So, less is more when you're designing for attention. That's around clearing the clutter, not barraging people with information. Use motion. It can be really effective if used sparingly and in a way that makes sense. And how do you find out if it makes sense? You also get it in front of your users. And you have some great sessions coming up. Thanks again to Jesse and Eric for having me. Eric left. He was so disappointed, calling him out. All right.